Dear Vice President Ribera, dear colleagues and students, dear guests and friends of the Hertie School. My name is Cornelia Woll and I'm the president of the Hertie School, and it's my distinct privilege to welcome you all here today for this event entitled Towards a Clean Industrial Deal, Can the EU Transform and Compete?, which is co-organized by our Jacques Delors Center, the OECD, and the Kiel Institute for the Global Economy. Today's event takes place at a pivotal moment. For the European Commission, the proposed Clean Industrial Deal is emerging as a central pillar of its strategy to align Europe's economic growth and competitiveness with sustainability and equity goals. The ambition to boost Europe's standing in the cutting-edge industries of tomorrow while managing the transformation of its traditional industrial sectors towards a decarbonized future is demanding but essential. Yet, as many of us know all too well, this vision is under significant strain. On the global stage, competitive pressures are mounting as other powers pursue aggressive industrial agendas and trade tensions deepen. Within Europe, political skepticism towards aspects of the green transition is gaining ground, threatening to undermine the progress achieved so far and challenging the unity needed for the road ahead. That is why we're especially pleased to host today's high-level conversation with one of Europe's most impactful voices in the green transition, Teresa Ribera, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for a Clean, Just, and Competitive Transition. In her current role, Ms. Ribera is at the forefront of implementing the European Green Deal, striving to decarbonize the economy while ensuring fairness and competitiveness. She's committed to guiding the Clean Industrial Deal, modernizing competition policy, and steering investments towards a just transition. Throughout her impressive career, her efforts have consistently reflected a commitment to integrating environmental goals with social equity. Prior to her current position, Ms. Ribera served as Spain's Vice President and Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge, where she gained recognition for both her policy ambition and her political pragmatism in phasing out coal, advancing renewables, and ensuring that no region was left behind. And this is just a short glimpse of her achievements. Ms. Ribera's academic background in law, coupled with her experience as director of the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, l'IDRI, in Paris, has equipped her with a profound understanding of the interplay between politics, law, and environmental science. Her many contributions to the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations further attest to her dedication and experience. And if you needed one further proof of her dedication and commitment to a green, prosperous, and just European future, allow me to point out that she's honoring us with her presence on a special day, her birthday. So on behalf of the Hertie School and our friends from the OECD and the Kiel Institute, I would like to wish you a very happy birthday, dear Ms. Ribera. Feliz cumpleaños, herzlichen Glückwunsch zum Geburtstag. And we have Swiss chocolate. Today's event marks the kickoff for tomorrow's closed workshop, where high-level participants will discuss the future of Europe's industrial policy. And we're very grateful for the partnerships we have with the Kiel Institute for the Global Economy and the OECD for making this possible. Our ambition is to continue contributing to this important debate through an industrial policy lab launched by the Kiel Institute and here at the Jacques Delors Center. So many thanks to everybody who has contributed to this, and I'd like to also thank Brian Kaheen sitting over here for his generous support to help us get this work off the ground. Before I welcome Ms. Ribera to the stage for her keynote, allow me to pass the floor to my dear colleague and head of the OECD Berlin Center, Nicola Brandt, without whom this two-day workshop would not have been possible. Nicola, the floor is yours.
Well, what can I add? Feliz cumpleaños, Vicepresidenta Ribera, della parte della Oste. We are extremely proud to have such an impactful political voice here today to open also our discussions for tomorrow. And here I'm also very proud that we can welcome, well, the combined intelligence of the Jacques Delors Center and the Institute of World Economics, but also many of my colleagues who contribute with their analysis and their recommendations to a better understanding of industrial policies that can provide for a greener future of the European Union and many other OECD countries. Thank you very much for being here, Vice President Ribera. And thank you, Cornelia, for making all of this possible.
Thank you so much for inviting me. In fact, there is always vested interest in this type of event, so I decided that if I came here in my birthday, I could ask for a wish. And my wish is, please stand up and defend all those values you have been fighting for during such a long time. Do not allow that fear or complexity keep us down. It is important to stand up and to defend what we know it might be crucial to keep on creating wealth, prosperity, and fairness. That is my wish. So not a small wish, I count on you. Thanks a lot for this invitation. I think that, as you say, this is such a tricky moment in history, Cornelia and Nicola. I think that we know. We are fully aware that this is the type of challenge that we thought that we were not going to experience, but we are experiencing. We know that many of those that have been building the idea of Europe for decades could look into current situation as a tricky situation where we need to defend democracy, values, prosperity, cooperation, rule of law, lots of things that we thought we could take for granted and that could be part of building shared progress alongside the peace dividend. And now it looks like quite a tricky moment when we are celebrating 80 years of peace and cooperation in Europe, and at the very same time we are trying to defend very obvious things that go along the respect of the UN Charter, the rule of law, the shared prosperity, the peace, the capacity to face together the challenges in front of us, the unity of the Europeans, and the freedoms, rights, and liberties that our parents did work to gain. And it is not something that comes from the scratch. It has taken decades, as I said, and in the previous mandate, in the previous European cycle, we already perceived that we had to react it together against things that were disruptions, global pandemics, the invasion of Ukraine, the crisis to supply chain disruptions, the reconfigurations of the global order, the way the economy changes alongside the digitalization, the conviction that security is important, and not exactly in the very traditional terms that we have been discussing about security, which in fact does come back as part of the day-to-day life, but also because submarine cables broke down, because there are cyber attacks, because there are climate events that demand a deep involvement of the public budget, so challenging the public budget being dedicated to provide services to the middle class in our countries, so many things that do come as a reality, as a means to understand disruption when compared to what we were thinking that we needed to build. And suddenly we realized that our project, the European project, is a kind of drop in the ocean of history. But we don't want this project to be diluted in the ocean. We want to fight for this project. We know that we cannot afford to be passive observers of global trends. On the contrary, we have good reasons why to defend, good reasons why to build alliance, good reasons to stay firm and to build partnerships. So to build resilience and reduce dependencies that could undermine our capacity to be sufficiently solid and firm in the defense of our values. We know that ethics, human rights, people, environment, democratic values do matter. And we realize that in certain cases there are people within, around societies that do not seem to be convinced, either because they did not have the impression of being benefited by this, because they do not trust the institutions to provide what they were expecting to provide, because there is fear, because there may be a kind of manipulation through the digital opinions being expressed in such a way that look like attractive but do hide part of the reality. And this means that we need to be smart, and we need to combine the social dimensions when thinking in terms of economic prosperity, or when thinking about the green agenda, when thinking about the environmental limits. And at the very core of this discussion, we enter into a phase where we in Brussels, broader picture in Europe, are starting a new mandate, a new cycle. And you in Germany, in Berlin, are also starting a new period, a new political mandate, where we need to identify how we can work together. Germany has been for such a long time the real engine of Europe's economy. Germany cannot cope with all the challenges on its own. We need to build a unity, we need to respond and to be prepared to be resilient for whatever crisis disruption that may come, and that should count on different alternatives to respond adequately to these changes. And then, yes, it is true, there may be some saying, yes, but then it is time to forget about all these green things that seem to be a little bit too complicated, and to think on how the old, nice past could help to recover the prosperity. And we know that this is not true either. There may be lots of things that we can do better, but turning back to the past is not going to work. It may hide a reality, but after a while, the discussion on whether the competitiveness for Europe needs to be built may come back. So, in fact, the main question, the main idea is that we need to assess, to understand the realities of today, so to be sure that we can come along in a smart manner to respond to the short-term fears and concerns, the needs that everybody expects to be responded by the different institutions and by the society that is supposed to be built on values, but without missing the purpose, without missing the point that it needs to be coherent with the mid and long-term expectations if we want this prosperity to last in the time to come. So, we understand that to a certain extent the green transition can be used to help into this mid and long-term prosperity and coherent approach, as we thought at the very beginning that it was a real need to invest for environmental reasons, for social reasons, for economic reasons, but to be updated to date, to take into consideration that yes, it is true that it is an opportunity to build an industrial continent that is sufficiently modern, sufficiently wise in the use of resources, to be resilient, to lower its dependencies from abroad, but also to retain talent, to bet on innovation, to facilitate a project that could count on everybody to retain talent and to create wealth. At the end, if we do not create wealth, we may have problems also in terms of social expectations. So in this broader understanding of security, we could be facing the challenge to democracy, this divide within the society, this lack of expectations that could bring us into a much more complicated day-to-day, secure and, happy life. This means that, yes, the green agenda is still quite a valid reference to think in industrial terms, to think in markets that work and deliver, to think in how we can combine the different pieces of composition that requires educated people, that requires investments in infrastructure, that requires availability of materials, that requires betting on a deep transformation of our energy system, which is key in order to provide energy, but also that allow us to dive into the construction of the single market and the different declinations of an European Union that at the end requires to be an union for security, an union for energy, an union for banking and capitals and investments and savings, an union for workers, a union for values, and not to turn back to a model where we coordinate some policies at the governmental level, but we are not able to overcome the borders within our union. The good thing is that if we take into consideration the reasons why we started to think about the green agenda as something that went beyond the climate science, the environmental science, but that was part of the societal changes, the capacity to build prosperity, to boost the investments in technology solutions, to drive a much more efficient use of our resources, the creation of jobs and competitiveness still remain. Every single reason why we started to think about that beyond those groups that were dedicated or that felt that it was part of their personal concerns still remain. They are even bigger, even deeper, even more important. And the big task is how we are going to combine the existing tools or to modernize the different tools to ensure that we can deliver and sound and be experienced as sufficiently convincing to bet into the acceleration of the transformation of the model we produce, the model we count to produce goods or to consume goods. The figures are interesting, are important, the expectations, the modeling on how many jobs it can create, how many savings we can make, what are the positive impacts in the trade balance it can drive, they remain and keep on growing and growing. There are a couple of additional elements of pressure. One of them is that now we feel a little bit more alone. It is not that we are alone. This is very important. We feel alone because we had a traditional partner in the international context, a partner that helped to build the international liberal order, the multilateralism, the rule of law, the governance around the same table, through the UN system, that is speaking loud that for the time being they don't want to be part of that discussion. So it is not irrelevant. It is much more difficult. It is not the first time. This time is a little bit more disruptive. We have some neighbors in the eastern borders that do not help either, that we know. But we have the rest of the world. We have the rest of the world. Most of the humankind being concerned about the impacts of the climate change. about the lack of resources to invest in their own development, about the fear on bloody wars. So, how we can transform all this into something that provides a proper role to be played by the European Union. Suddenly, we have the impression that we don't want anymore to be the promise that creates frustration, but the promise that delivers. That we have an additional responsibility in terms of building this confidence on the UN multilateral system, the rule of law, and the capacity to create wealth through a different model that gets a proper balance between an open economy, a commitment to the people, and the respect, the increasing respect for nature and ecosystems, based in peace, based in cooperation, based in the rule of law. This is where we are. There's a small piece of that relates back to the domestic agenda. And there's a large piece of that relates back to our external agendas and policies. And being coherent and combine the two aspects of our agendas is not going to be easy. It's not being easy. But we have some pieces of information that do matter. In fact, if we enter into a much more quicker development of the single market of our unions, we will be saving resources, we will be unlocking the potential, we will be creating the conditions to bet back in Europe. If we combine that with our external agendas, we may be building resilience with our other partners, but also to ensure that through this diplomacy we can provide a much more reliable chain of supply, a much more prosperous development model, so peace creation in many countries. Allow me to enter into the clean industrial deal, the question that turns back to the question that you have raised for today. Can the European Union transform and compete? Yes, of course, and we need to do so, and it is not easy, and it is not compete against the rest of the world, but to compete against ourselves to become increasingly better, to be able to provide goods and services with a smart use of resources and creating wealth. This is why we launched the Clean Industrial Deal. A clean industrial deal that tries to reflect that, of course, we managed, and it was not easy either, to set a landscape where we could identify targets, the horizon, where we wanted to arrive. But building the pathways towards that landscape is not easy. It may require to combine the different conditions differently, but it will drive a capacity to recover confidence, as I say, to invest in our industry, to decarbonize the basic traditional industry, to bet on manufacturing capacities for clean tech, to ensure that the energy transformation plays the role of a big driver to transform our industry, but also the bills that we pay as families, as households, when consuming energy. The impression is that we need to forget about a kind of option between climate and industry, but on the contrary, making them work together in order to create wealth to our citizens. Creating the right investment framework to accelerate the green transition and to protect Europe's long-term prosperity, ensuring our industries compete on fair terms globally. So again, turning back to the external agenda. So again, paying attention to the fact that if we only pay attention to the lowest possible price to pay, we may bring our societies to the lowest possible price to pay for labor, to the lowest possible price to pay in the short term for the use of resources. That does not drive innovation, that does not create prosperity, that brings us to compete on something that is not going to last or to create wealth. So the first question that came up is that, yes, we know that we cannot compete on an energy that we do not produce, that creates environmental concerns, and that will always be provided by a higher price than the price being paid by the people that owns this energy, fossil fuels. We can count on other sources of energy that should be much more closer to our soul, that could be a driver for industry innovation, and that should force us to think differently the way we manage our energy system. Not the electricity system, but the energy system as such. How we can ensure secure, sustainable and cost-effective energy across the European Union. And we tried to provide the first response on the Affordable Energy Action Plan, which does not cover everything, but does provide an insight on how to proceed. We need lower energy costs in the very short term, so to be resilient, but in fact, what we need is a much more relevant structural reform to achieve our energy union. So, to count on stability in long-term contracts, but also to think about the infrastructures that we may require, including the interconnections, not only when thinking about electricity, but also thinking about molecules, and how we can manage those systems in such a way that they are reliable, that they are efficient, that they can provide ways to stabilize cost and ensure predictability. How we can play on interconnectors as a backbone for our energy union. How we can ensure that this is affordable in the short and mid-run, and how we can de-risk the investments to count on the private appetite to get into this. We have almost doubled wind and solar capacity in 4 years all across Europe. This may mean that we need to manage the system differently. This may mean that we need to manage the market references and regulations differently. How we can foster a more resilient, predictable and investment-friendly energy environment for the European industry is one of the elements that we introduced in the Clean Industrial Deal. At the very same time, we know that this may require a deep involvement of the public budgets. Not only the fact that consumers of energy goods, energy services, may pay for what they consume or what it is related to the availability, to the access to what they consume, but also to what extent the public involvement can help to boost the clean technologies, the industrial innovation, the capacity to make the upfront investments in the infrastructures and the management of these infrastructures to ensure that we take and draw the opportunities and not just cope with the ex post cost of not having done it at the right time. This is also part of what we try to reflect in the Clean Industrial Deal. How we can combine ideas in terms of access to capital, affordable capital, how it relates back to some other dimensions when thinking about the European Union, including things that we started not so far ago but that have not moved sufficiently quick. The banking union, the capitals union, the savings and investments union. How we can ensure that we count on the other raw materials that we may be needing. How we can ensure that we count on those materials that are around us through the circular economy and the Circular Economy Acts, the recovery of what we use, the efficient use of what we use, the existence of markets that can ensure that they are predictable and available, but also how it may be used in the external dimension to bring other partners into a much more balanced approach in terms of development, in terms of co-funding this development. To what extent we count on the skills and education requirements to work in a digital and green economy that is being built already? This is probably one of the most important bottlenecks if we do not pay attention. to the adequate identification of the skills, training requirements, and education, we may either not retain talent, not to count on the talent that we need, not to count on the satisfaction for our people to get into this transformation and being engaged enough to accelerate the transformation. How we can play with all these elements without facing or overcoming the risk of falling behind during this transition in certain areas. Again, the European Union has lots of things to do when taking into consideration that state aid, that public money could be taken into consideration better if it takes beyond its national border, but at the very same time does not forget that territorial cohesion could be important in order to avoid disaffection, but also to ensure opportunities for all. Lowering the risk of inequalities between regions or the fragmentation of our industrial base. Just to end into something that will be pretty important in the mandate that we are promoting right now, and that turns back to this combination of the competition policies together with the green and just transition as part of the cluster. If we want to tackle one of our long-standing challenges, the fragmentation of the single market, we may have a clear idea on where we want to be, but how we can unlock the potential through the dismantling of the barriers that still exist. It is quite impressive to see to what extent Draghi recovers one of the most important data being offered by the International Monetary Fund, estimating that internal barriers are equivalent to 45% tariff on manufactured goods and 110% levy on services. So, these barriers could cost the European economy an estimated 10% of the GDP. Why I turn to this data? Because again, when thinking about many of the challenges that we are facing in the current landscape in geopolitics, we need to remain firm when talking to the others, but we also need to remain firm when trying to identify the best ways to dive into the construction of the European Union and the construction of the single market. I guess that this is part of what you have been working on since the very beginning. All the institutions being behind the organization of this 2 days journey, conference, have been thinking through these elements, how to combine the external and the domestic dimensions, how to steer the right balance between democracy, rights, freedoms, liberties, and economic, well-functioning societies. And I guess that this is what we will need to fight for, not in an easy context, but this is also what we are demanded right now, either if we go to Washington, if we go to Delhi, if we go to the city of Mexico, or if we go to Cape Town, to Lesotho. I like quoting Lesotho right now, or any small island state. People will be waiting for us, not only in the international order, but also to be sure that whatever responses we build here in Europe are fair enough to create wealth, but fair enough to respect the others. And we need you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good evening from my side as well. I'm Teresa Ribera, I'm Deputy Director of the Jacques Delors Center. I'm going to moderate us tonight, and we're going to start with a couple of questions from our side, but then we're also going to open up for a discussion with the audience. So if you have a question in mind or you want to think about a question, do this now, and then we will get back to you in a couple of minutes. But before we do this, I wanted to dive into some of the aspects you already mentioned a bit deeper. And let us start, Executive Vice President. You stressed the importance of framing the green agenda in industrial terms, right? And the European Union has some big ambitions on that. We already adopted the Net Zero Industry Act last year with hugely ambitious goals in terms of domestic manufacturing for things like solar panels, wind equipment, hydrogen. And if we now look into the latest numbers, it doesn't really seem to be moving into the right direction, right? So battery investments have been slashed or delayed quite a bit over the last couple of months. We still don't see a lot of investment in solar panel production. Wind energy equipment production is under huge amounts of pressure from Chinese overcapacities. So what is your assessment of the state of where we are? Are we on the right track and we just need to wait a bit to see it? Are we on the right track and we're just too slow to move on it? Or is there something fundamentally going wrong in the way we are pushing this green industrial agenda at the EU level?
May I say that a little bit of the three things? Yeah. So I think that we do not go quick enough in many of the things that should be happening right now, and that we have the capacities, and we need to be sure that we coordinate and have a common view. And there we go too slow, and in certain occasions we are still quite reliant on things that we are not able to produce, and then we feel that we may require external support in order to come into that. At the very same time, it is difficult to accept that there may be others willing to enter into our market without respecting our laws or creating difficulties within our system and our industries that do respect relatively high standard when thinking about social and environmental conditions. So we need more cooperation and more transparency on that. And we are not sufficiently prepared for that either. I mean, we cannot be sure that we can follow what it is happening when thinking on investments that may be driven by someone else that is not reflecting the real cost when showing the price, entering into the market, or investments that can pour a lot within our own industrial ecosystem, but that do not really hook their deployment, their full development with the local capacities and the capacity to improve on that. And I guess that what we need to find out is how we can combine acceleration without hesitation, paying social attention to avoid the clash and to those expressing the fear not to support the transformation of the agenda, but also to be wise in the use of the resources, to identify what could be the elements in a value chain that can create the hubs around, and that should be counting on the external cooperation in case it is needed.
That's also one of the key questions for Germany, right? This was your first official visit to the new German government. The date had been fixed for quite some time, but we made sure that you actually have a government to visit today. That's good. And you will have noticed that one of the key questions on the minds of people here is how to turn around the economic tide for Germany, right? And this was front and center in the campaign. It's now big on the agenda for the next German government, but it's always very much framed in national terms, right? And that's something that at Jacques Delors Center we have sometimes are a bit frustrated with. So maybe you can bring in the Brussels perspective on this. So from an EU perspective, and maybe with the Clean Industrial Deal in mind, when you look at this new German government, what should be the key priorities on the economic policy agenda for Germany right now?
I'm going to be shy on that, but I have a couple of comments. I think that something which is very important is to ensure that the German economy boosts again, not mistaking the rules to boost. So there may be the temptation to turn back to a previous context where you could rely on things that do not exist anymore as a point of reliance. and it could be a mistake. You may need to come along to support in the very short term those industries that could be reliant on that past economy, and I think that this is very important. If there is no social comfort, it could not go forward. But you cannot forget that the green reference, that the elements on competitiveness, to look into the future. Let's take, for instance, the example of the car industry. I've been discussing on the car industry with many of you for a very long time. We were so happy to count on a very efficient industry that could count on the most performing engines, that we thought that it was going to last forever. So there was a strong opposition to move forwards into something that could be differently and enter into the future. Well, we did not pay attention, but the reality worldwide did change, and others took that position. The solution should not be, so let's come back to the combustion engine because it was very performant. We will have to look into how we can build the next phase and how we can catch up or to ensure that we can survive with those elements, strengths, to count on the people and to count on the transition time to be able to adapt. So yes, the German economy is great. It's industrially based. It has lots of experience. It loves the technology development. It requires, and it has been working a lot in the energy transformation. It is a great economy in terms of also of the size, the large amount of resources that it mobilizes. But it will never be able to work on its own without a proper understanding of the whole European landscape. So I think that working together could deliver more, and thinking only in domestic terms may be missing some of the elements that could difficult this to happen in a much more successful way.
But let me push you a bit on this, because I think the question of like how much do we want to like really fixate on past economies, and whether we are overdoing it with like regulatory efforts to spur the transformation, is something that, like with the German debate, is very similar to the EU debate, right? So we have a discussion on whether we have overdone it with the Green Deal, and we now need to put competitiveness front and center at the EU level and in Germany, and of course Germany is pushing this as well, right? And we have questions on like, should we adopt fleet emission standards at the EU level, where it's really much about like how fast we want to push this transformation, and how much do we still need to count on existing industries in order not to lose on the competitiveness side, right? So the FAZ published an interview with you this morning, where they called you the last warden of the Green Deal. Now, as the last warden of the Green Deal, what's your take? Where are we on the simplification, the omnibus street? Are we actually in a world where we are making green regulation more effective and efficient, or are we risking like throwing out the baby with the bathtub a bit?
There are people that would like to see the second one and the latter one, and there are people that still insist on the first one. I think that all this discussion responds to something that was real, relevant, not so far ago, and now it is even more real and more relevant. Mm-hmm. So the goals remain for the very good reasons that they were identified 20, 10, or 5 years ago. Then, human factor. If we all sit around the table, being 27, and in different settings, different 27 declinations, and we try to reflect how we can bet on a solution for a certain problem, we are so professional and committed that are able to add layers and layers and layers of complexity. So yes, I can accept, I think that it is fair to say that we may get the same result being much more simpler. That I think that everybody can agree. And this is what we should be thinking of, how we can achieve that. But at the very same time, there are certainly temptations coming from some to get rid of all of that. If we get rid of all of that, the very same reasons that drove us to enter into this discussion will reappear. Because we do not want to waste our money in investments that are not investments, but wasting money. Because the change of the world and the parameters is real, and we want to learn to be very effective in the way we invest our money. So some clues on how to do that could help. And this is more or less what we try to steer, how we can get a balance between a simplified approach to get the same goals without leaving the baby in the bath alone.
Maybe going back to Germany, one of the big economic policy decisions that have already been made by this new government is the reform of the debt brake. Right, so no limit for defense spending above 1%, and then a big new infrastructure fund for investments and climate neutrality. Now, my sense is the EU view on this is twofold. On the one hand, there's a big sigh of relief to say, well, finally Germany is doing something and maybe deliver some fiscal impulse for the rest of Europe that then by extension can help everyone a bit. The other one is, oh gosh, Germany has 500 billion to pop up its own industries again and to maybe undermine fair competition in the single market, right? Now, you are Commissioner for competition, so your job is to fall into the second camp. But how do you feel this? Where do you stand? What, from an EU perspective, how should Germany use its new fiscal power to bring value, not just for Germany, but for an EU perspective as well?
First of all, I think it is very important that the German society, the German economy, the German industry, the German citizens feel happy and proud of themselves. As in any other member state, as in any other country, it is very important to have the confidence that you are betting on your future and that you are doing things right. So I think it is key to recover that spirit, because for a certain time, the impression was that people feel blue and not very well motivated. So I think that is something that we should avoid. From that perspective, I think it is good that there is this decision saying we are going to bet to invest in our own relevant things. We are going to modernize the infrastructures, we are going to bet in our industry, we are going to bet in a broader understanding of what security may mean, we are going to boost innovation. I think that that's good. Then we enter into the second part of your question, which is also relevant. As I said, Germany is fantastic, and Germany can perform much better if we are 27 acting together than if it is only driven through something that cannot last very long, because any of our member states is not going to be able to be efficient in the provision of solutions for the existing problems of the world. So how we can get the right balance between betting on your own local priorities without missing purpose in the sense of being part of a broader community is going to be very important. At the end, when thinking on how the others or how we collectively can develop solutions for whatever we are doing, we know that we could be much more successful. If Germany bets in a very aggressive manner on its sound priorities without paying attention to what it can mean for the neighboring countries, for the joint infrastructures, for the cost of capital, for the skilling, there may be distortions. So I guess that what we need to be able to identify as soon as possible is what are the main lines to take in a national government program where, of course, it is fair, it is fantastic from a democratic perspective, and it is a natural political willingness to bet on your own society, but how it can accommodate to the broader understanding of the European level. Otherwise, if we have one big economy betting on its own without having a proper understanding on how it relates back to the rest of the member states, yes, We may be saying, hey, we were supposed to work together to develop joint solutions, to bet into something that does not distort the capacity of your neighboring countries to develop similar approaches, but without less capacity to bet into their own economy. And this is going to be challenging. One of the most beautiful things that we have invented in the last years is the IPCIs, the important projects of European interest. So to say, okay, there may be many things that will be required in the time to come that require an important amount of public money being blended with private money, so to come up in a quicker way to provide solutions for something that is important for our European economy. Let's do it together. It has worked. We are still learning. We may improve or enlarge the amount of IPCIs. It depends not only on the European Commission, on a single budget, but it depends on the combination of different national budgets being blended with the European budget. So we do not count on a single European budget that covers the 27 spending in the 27 member states. We align an union budget with 27 national budgets. It is normal that the national budget decides to prioritize the national spending. Let's try to think in the mid and long-term perspective on how we can avoid harming each other in this game. We will pay attention as competition services, of course, and we will try to work together with the German authorities to avoid any type of harm.
Okay, let's come back to the EU finance aspect of it in a minute. First, but I also want to go into another dimension of it, and that's energy policy, right? Because this is where the German priorities dovetail very nicely with EU priorities, like bringing down energy prices, and you mentioned this, and it's one of the areas where everyone wants to do something, right? Now, what the coalition has proposed now in its coalition treaty, in practice, two things that might actually set the next government on a collusion course with Brussels, right? One is direct subsidies for energy-intensive industries. The other is the expansion of gas-fired power stations in Germany. Two of the things that you will have to debate with the next German government. So how do you see these plans? Is Germany on the right track there, or is the next coalition looking into the right goals, but maybe using the wrong means?
This is still a little bit early to see what we are talking very precisely about, but yes, this is a point of concern, and this brings back to what, a couple of years ago, discussing on how electricity prices were formed, and to what extent it was important to keep it simple, to keep it unified, to avoid distortions, and to be transparent, even in the most difficult times of spikes in the electricity markets. So predictability, stability, and level playing field for all industrials. Level playing field for all industrials that may clash if some industrials may find a different setting. So a concentration of attractiveness in fiscal terms in a very concrete area in Europe. So yes, it is a tricky point. We need to pay attention to that, to avoid distortions, and to ensure that the industrial landscape in Europe does not reflect a building with unfair manners to deal with the energy cost. That is on one side. The other thing, it may be required for energy security to count on intermediate gas infrastructures. It may be the case. Let's pay attention, because we also remember that we don't want to get trapped in investments that do not last, or that we do not want to use taxpayers' money in such a way that we are divesting from other more profitable, in social terms, mid and long term goals. What I want to mean by this is that anyone understands that no government can face a risk of non-available energy in your society, and this energy transition may be challenging in different ways the approaches at the national scale in our member states. Let's be cautious not to waste public money on something that cannot last. Let's be precise on how much it makes sense in the short run, how much should be the limit in the mid and long run.
Do we already have questions from the audience? I see a couple. Oh wow, I see lots of hands. So let's maybe collect a few, and then we give it back to you. Maybe here in the front first.
Thank you.
And maybe quickly introduce yourself.
Sure. Lukas Knigge for Table Briefings. There are intense debates about the right level of climate targets currently, and in many capitals, but also in Brussels and Strasbourg, it often seems like it's a race to the bottom for the climate targets. If it's true what you said, that transformation and competitiveness go together and do not contradict each other, how come that so many of your colleagues in the EU Commission, but also in the EU Parliament, but also in the capitals, have not understood that yet? Thank you.
Another one?
Hi, Oliver Neuern, Politico. So it's only 2 years ago that actually the Commission has put something very similar to the table, what we see right now. It was the Green Deal Industrial Plan in 2023. And I've had the feeling when I was listening to that, a lot of the things you said could have also been attributed to that. What I find is very interesting, like if we look at the Clean Industrial Deal, there's not a single mention of that, even though this plan is only 2 years old. And I wanted to ask, like, what are the main differences, in your opinion, to this older plan? Like, what are the new things? Why should it work out this time when we're now sitting here 2 years after and have already forgotten about the last plan that should have been a game changer and was presented as it? Thank you very much.
Carsten Neuhoff at DIW Berlin. Really liked your picture of creating the landscape in which we can define targets, and targets against which we compete with ourselves as much as with others. And we've seen China defining targets, innovation targets, modernization targets, and succeeding on e-mobility and other technologies with these targets and clearly structured policies. So where would you define targets that reflect not only climate ambition, but also our modernization, innovation ambition, and therefore kind of take the people along, but then allow us to implement effective policy packages?
Okay, no, thank you so much. Well, you may ask the question to the others too, on why they do not realize that climate targets are part of the competitiveness. What it is clear is that the most successful companies that you may figure out are those companies that are quite efficient in the use of resources and that are ready to be resilient for whatever climate change they may be living in. So it depends on how you introduce the time dimension, and that could turn back also to the comment being made by the political colleague. I think that what we are missing right now, which is quite a complicated thing, is how we can introduce the time dimension in the decisions that we take. How we can be sure that the fears or the concerns in the very short run are being addressed by policy decisions without undermining the possibility to ensure long-lasting competitiveness, being prepared for the midterm. The midterm goals are not going to come up, or the midterm solutions are not going to come out from the blue. So either we bet already on something that is consistent with the pressing needs and the possibility to be investing in the midterm, or we will always be under the threat of short-term solutions that could undermine the possibility to create wealth. And I think that that is what we are experiencing right now, that very precisely. Thinking that you can forget about climate goals or green goals because that can help to boost industry is not real. That can help in the very short run to provide goods, services, or make some profits, but that will not last. and this is where still the example of the car industry may help. We stayed for such a long time, probably more than 20 years, thinking that it was going to last because we were performing very well. But in fact, of course, in the mid-run, there could be other solutions coming from elsewhere. So I think that it is important to address this consistency between the very compelling and fair demands in the very short run with creating the conditions to keep on creating wealth in the mid and long run. Why it is going to work or what is the add value? Very honestly, I don't think that there is something that comes from the scratch, solves everything and full stop. I think that we know that this is difficult. But the question is that the alternative does not exist. So how we can help in the better understanding of the development of the measures. So it was easier, and it was not easy, but it was easier to say, these are the targets, full stop. And then we identified the first row of measures. Let's tackle the energy field. Let's see how we can work on innovation to face in new technologies. Well, but the problem is that phasing out and phasing in do not necessarily encompass at the very same time. Let's think on what is the cost of capital. Yes, but those that did bet on something different are not ready to come along with a different cost of capital because they are more intense on CO2 or less intense on CO2. So I think that this is, to a certain extent, it is normal what we experience. It is the deep transformation that comes up with lots of question marks and complaints. And probably Carsten is right. How we can combine not only we are talking about climate, but concrete industrial measures that enter into what is the level of success, how we can assess what we did, or how we can create conditions for further innovation, and the acceptance of some failures as something that will happen if we are betting on innovation, because there may be things that would not work at the first attempt. So I think that, well, it is what it is happening, and it's not only happening here. I don't think that it is going to be described as the perfect case towards this industrial success in China, because they had some successes and they have got a lot. They have failed in many other aspects. Or that we can close our borders and weaponize the trade flows to ensure that we are going to produce in our countries, because that is not going to work either. So I think that, yes, it is true that the task is complex, but I think that there are quite a few issues that we know that are important to be mainstream in the decisions, being efficient in the use of raw materials, reduce the level of dependence from abroad, trying to bet on innovation, trying to be much more fair in terms of providing opportunities to the citizens and the people, betting on public infrastructures to facilitate things, ensuring that markets do reflect in a transparent way the way prices reflect cost, or that there is not a concentration of power in a market, or there is not a subsidized economy that could not last if there is not this subsidy happening behind. So I think that these are things that we have managed and we have developed for a long while, and now we need to adapt.
I think we have time for another round of questions. Are there others? Yes. Maybe here.
Thank you. Marion Janssen, Director for Trade at the OECD. Last week, I attended in Paris a conference, a private sector conference on similar questions. and the mood in the room was that FDI investment is already leaving the European Union, and that there may be a time span of 6 months to avoid that the investment that is needed for the green transition, for infrastructure, for skills, is still available in the European Union. Do you also feel that sense of urgency? And if yes, how can we meet that 6 months target?
Senora Ribera. My name is Tom O'Donnell. I work on energy and geopolitics. I was with the Wilson Center until recently, but there's a problem at the Wilson Center in Washington. I wanted to, you mentioned gas and this problem of gas, and I wanted to put a little content on that, I think there's a technological problem, a technological failing, in the sense that, and 3 ministers now in Germany have tried to grapple with this, and I think they'd agree. Altmaier, Mr. Habeck was quite aware, and now Katharina Reiche, and that is the 8th monitoring report in the roughly 2020 said in the cover letter that it would not be possible for Germany to produce on its own territory sufficient renewables. Therefore, it has to import electricity from nearby and green hydrogen or something like that from far away. I asked people on the committee, do you know anything about this? They said, no, we're not engineers. We're just listening to what the ministries are telling us. So the problem they have is with closing a quarter of the energy production that was nuclear and was not, I know your opinion on nuclear, but it was a quarter of German production. So Altmaier started to work very hard, and then Mr. Habeck told us, I was at a meeting, it was not off the record, he said we need 36 to 39 gigawatts of new natural gas generation. Merz in January said 50. Now Katharina Reiche is saying 20. I mean, you can't get more than 5 or 10 out of, in a year. You're lucky to build that. And the problem is, the committee, the independent committee, says it's not possible to do it on the territory of Germany. And the other problem is, when there's Dunkelflaute, there is no technology that's been developed for long-term grid-scale storage, a universal one. And so this is a fundamental problem that I can't see a way to solve without natural gas. And Merz has a real problem now with Parliament, with Bundestag. I would say probably the majority would vote to take Nord Stream gas if he didn't enforce party discipline. And so I can't see how to get out of this without nuclear energy. It's a many-sided question. But it's a technical, it's not a political question, it's a technical question.
Maybe one more, yeah.
Joachim Spangberg, Friends of the Earth. Just to the last remark, one sentence, the Federal Environmental Agency said it is possible because they accounted also for energy saving and sufficiency, which is obviously not on the agenda, and I don't see it on the agenda of the EU very clearly. My question is, in the current international debate from the right-wing extreme, we see strategies. One of them is hollowing out terminologies by confusing discourses and stealing their meaning of sustainability, of transition, of whatever. A second one is to promote the officially adopted targets, but to try to undermine all measures to adopt the targets, which is not easy to attack because he officially keeps the target. And the last one is, instead of structural change, to propose silver bullet technologies to come, be it geoengineering, carbon capture and storage, or what have you. So this is 3 threats from this kind of political intention, which undermine the Green Industrial Deal, like the Green Deal as a whole, like many other policies. What is the Commission in general, and what is you in your portfolio doing to not fall into these traps, which I see very open at the European level, and in particular the technology, silver bullet technology trap is one which is quite close to the heart of many in the Commission.
I think we had one more question somewhere here. Back in there, yeah.
Hello, my name is Sam. I'm a student at Hertie, specializing in international affairs and European governance. My question was less on the technical side, more on the political side. There has been, as we've touched upon a bit, quite some backlash against the Green Deal already. So my question was more, how do you see your ability as an executive vice president of the Commission on the ability to do your work? And so, in essence, succeeding in the green transition with increasing distrust towards Commission and its top officials, especially from other institutions, that can mainly be caused by the Pfizer-Gate ruling that happened last week. Thank you.
Okay. Big questions on urgency, nuclear, right-wing populist strategies, and the backlash.
Yes, thank you so much. I was trying to keep the key words, starting with trade. No, how we can deal with trade, nuclear, backlash, and urgency. Well, very honestly, I think that you are right. This is not easy. Figures do not necessarily match in many occasions because we combine things as we understand them today, and there may be room for efficiency, for savings, for smart moves in the whole economy that could allow to organize things better, and that in many occasions what we lose is the purpose, the overarching understanding on where we are. So there may be this incremental approach that we always tend to consider as the way we will keep on going, and most probably we will need to think how we can combine things in such a way that do match in a context where incrementalism will not be possible in the time to come. So I think that we need to be smart, to be saving, to be more efficient, to combine different solutions, and there is a cultural change that needs to take place. Just to say that, yes, at the very same time, there is this naive understanding that there may be something safe in our situation, our concerns, our problems. Of course, there may be many things that could improve our situation, but all those things that can happen need to be crafted for a very long time and will probably not be in an isolated manner to solve the big problems that we are facing. The most impacting thing for me, and I come back to the question back there, is the silence. Yes, I think that because of the difficulties, we may be experiencing a backslash. Too difficult, let's give up. Too complicated, let's try to get rid even of what it has been agreed up to now in terms of targets. I think that this is a mistake. Very honestly, it's the very same type of mistake that we face when someone says, do you think that 1.5 is possible, or we need to give up and it will be 2 or 3 or 4? Well, I don't know if it will be 1.5, 2, 3, 4. But I know that 1.5 is better than 2, 2 is better than 2.5, and so on and so on. I think that we need to combine a proper rational landscape where we need to introduce references to guide the way we combine tools, because if we miss those references, we could not even think on how we combine tools, with the humble understanding that even if doing the best thing, we may reach, or we may need to introduce other things. But we need to keep that in mind, because if we give up in terms of the landscape, we will never manage to try to think how we can solve the problems, to figure out how we can combine tools. So it is a big mistake to say, let's forget, we cannot make it. What is the alternative? It could be horrible, the alternative. That is to the backslash on this discussion and to the try to irritate and polarize on something that, yes, of course, it is difficult. Nobody said that it is easy. But very honestly, the alternative is terrifying. So let's try to figure out how we can do our best to keep it in a manageable area. And yes, I think that there is not a silver bullet. And yes, I think that any discussion, apart from technical, and it may be quite different depending on the natural resources, on the existing capacities, on the dependencies, on the geographies, there may be lots of different combinations of solutions. There is something that goes beyond the technical discussion on numbers, which is very important. Because if there is a technical discussion on numbers, at least we can more or less have a sense of what it makes more sense. But then I think that there is another element, which is the human factor, the history, the legacy, the preferences, and the acceptance. And in certain cases, acceptance is that, yes, of course, we need to keep on doing, making, we need to pay attention to the social policies. We may need to handle the timing in a different way to give us more time here or there, to spend more, because we need the social acceptance of what we do. And in order to do so, we need to have fair and honest public debates and ensure that people can experience the benefits of what we do. Otherwise, people do not support or people do not understand. So probably there is something that should be raised back, coming back to your point, when thinking why it is so difficult to count on everybody in the European institutions to support these goals. Or maybe we need to explain us better, maybe we need to be much more open to the public discussion or to the dedicated and focused discussion with the different stakeholders, that's for sure. And being quite assertive, maybe appreciated by some, maybe rejected by others. So again, even in that context, there is no silver bullet. And my final comment on trade was, what was the, yes, sorry, no, it was not trade, it was investment, yes, trade was your position. Yes, well, I'm not, I think that this is urgent, that's for sure. I'm not so sure about the assessment that you have made. I mean, being in Washington, being in many other countries, being reliable is an asset. Playing a pendular string is a non-asset. And it is a non-asset there where it has been so explicit, the pendular string, but be aware. It may be a non-asset for Europeans if we start playing pendular strings. So, we have witnessed things that we did not expect. The US bond going down, the dollar going down, the Mexican peso going up, in a very integrated economy. So we have lots of complications. We have internal borders, difficulties, red tape, I don't know, lots of things. But we are reliable, we respect the rule of law, we have the infrastructures and the logistics, we have the willingness, we have clear frameworks, we have a strength in terms of trained people. Anyone leaving the university in the US, an average citizen, may need to turn back to the banks, what, $80,000 the day they leave the university? This is not some happily. This is not something that is so common in Europe. So what I want to mean by this is that, in fact, it may be the case, and for many reasons we need to be quite quick. We need to strengthen our reliability and attractiveness towards private investors. We need to show that we can de-risk what it still needs to be de-risked, but we should be saying we have a plan. We are not pendular. We are going to keep on building in our strengths, so to make it easier. And I'm a little bit more optimistic than you. I mean, I think that, yes, we need to quickly take decisions on how we can ensure that investment takes place in Europe. But I honestly think that we have lots of things that are quite attractive in terms of driving investments towards Europe, including long-term investments in sound infrastructure decisions that could deal with energy, but that relate back to the equipment or the services that are needed to be effective in the use of these infrastructures. So there may be lots of noise out there, but there also may be lots of expectations, including, by the way, on something that you raised, this money being announced as a commitment to invest to modernize the German industry, the German economy, and the capacity to provide the right infrastructures for a big country. So I think that I could not be pessimistic on that. Not to forget about the challenges, but not pessimistic either.
Okay, I think we have to end here on a very optimistic note. And I think if I would summarize it, maybe there is a moment now for Europe that hasn't been there in quite some time, because we can now be a reliable investment location for green industries, but it will require sticking to the goals, as you mentioned, despite the backlash, and to rethink the toolbox and how we combine the right measures, and for Germany to put lots of money into important projects of common European interest. But I think on the second part we will talk a lot next tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.